That Triathlon Show 285. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Coach Blair Cartmell. Blair is a Scottish triathlon coach who works as a junior national coach with British Triathlon, in addition to running his own coaching business, New Triathlon. Blair has previously been coaching with the Scottish Federation as well at the home Commonwealth Games, for example, and coaching with the Stirling University Performance Centre. He is also the personal coach of up-and-coming long-distance star George Goodwin, who recently had what you might call a breakthrough performance when he placed third at the PTO Championships in Daytona in 2020. We'll get into Blair's coaching philosophy and much more in just a little bit. But before that, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Precision Hydration create electrolytes that you can match to how much sodium you lose in your sweat. So somebody who loses a lot of sodium in their sweat would take a more concentrated supplement than somebody who does not lose as much. And that is very easy to find out with the help of Precision Hydration's online sweat test. I have used Precision Hydration electrolytes for years and I really love them. In addition to really working in terms of avoiding things like cramps and performance degradation as the day goes on, whether we're talking longer races or training sessions, it also just tastes really nice. So it's really a nice way to get your hydration in. You can get 15% off your Precision Hydration order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Roka are the world-leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. I use a large number of Roka products, all the way from their Rory prescription glasses to products like the Maverick X2 wetsuit and the Gen 2 Elite tri-suit, and much in between. And one common denominator of all of these products is that the user experience I've had with all of Roka's products has always been fantastic. Again, I've been using Roka products for years, and the attention to detail and to top-notch quality in all of these products are absolutely fantastic. So I can highly recommend them. You can get 20% off your Roka order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. One more quick thing before the interview. If you are a long-time listener of the podcast and you are enjoying it, it would really help a ton if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you get it, where it's possible to rate and review, for example, Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or wherever else you might find it. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Coach Blair Cartmell. Today's guest on That Triathlon Show is Blair Cartmell. Blair, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Michael. How are you?
I'm good as well. Thank you very much. Why don't you start by just giving an introduction to yourself so that the listeners can learn more about what you're doing and where you come from, what your background is in the sport?
Yeah, thanks for that. So obviously, I'm originally from Scotland. I'm 35. And I've been around in the sport for quite a while now. During my own years of being an athlete, I was a swimmer growing up, and then went into triathlon. I did my first triathlon in 2000, and then went to university in Stirling, which was the National Performance Centre, and it still is. And I was lucky enough to have my first proper coach was Darren Smith, who was the national coach at the time. He had started in 2000. So, I did my studies and finished in 2007, and then went straight into coaching. There was a position, an apprentice coach position, based at Stirling, and I took that, and that was for 2 years, working with Triathlon Scotland and the university in Stirling. And then after that, got a full-time job in 2009. With the Federation in Scotland, and was there until 2016. And during that time, lucky enough and fortunate enough to work with a great group of junior athletes, junior boys, who progressed through the ranks and went on to win major medals at World Juniors and World Europeans. And that was Mark Austin and Grant Sheldon. I also coached at the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, which was a great experience. As I said, I left Scotland in end of 2016. I took a break from performance sport for maybe 2 years, performance coaching. And then in 2019, a position came back in performance coaching back in Bath, where I am now at the university and the centre. And I've been there, since the start of 2019. And I've recently just started a new job with British Triathlon, where I'm one of 3 New England lead coaches working with the junior program. Quite varied.
Yeah, that's a really great overview. One thing to point out for those listeners not aware, Darren Smith that you mentioned there as being your coach back in the day at Stirling is one of the legendary coaches in ITU, has coached a lot of really high-profile athletes through the years. And another thing that I wanted to ask you is, so in British Triathlon, we are quite familiar with like Leeds as a performance center, and Loughborough University has a really big setup as well. How is Bath kind of related to those other centers? What is the setup there with the different performance centers that British Triathlon has?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And obviously throughout the UK, there is different centre hubs based around universities, and Bath is one of those performance centres. And we obviously have Vicky Holland, who trains here, Rio Olympic bronze medalist and world champion. And her husband, Reese, is the head coach of the centre. And I was the assistant coach up until recently. And obviously based around a university, we try and attract obviously athletes to come and study and train. And obviously there's other centres around the UK as well. So it's a good setup.
How many centres of that sort of around the universities exist in total?
Well, at different levels. So we have obviously Loughborough and Leeds as the main ones, Stirling in Scotland, we've got Cardiff in Wales, obviously Bath. We've then got other centres in Nottingham, based at the university, Eastbourne, Birmingham. They're kind of the main ones. So athletes have got more choice now of where to go, which is good.
Yeah. All right, perfect. So let's move into a bit of an overview of your coaching and training philosophy or your thoughts around coaching and training. Can you elaborate on that just freely? What you think in general terms? What are the things when you perhaps sit down and meet an athlete and they ask you about what you think about training? What are the things that you would describe?
Yeah, I think for me as a coach, I try and keep things as simple as possible. So do the basics very well. And I think it's about, for me as well, it's about creating memories for the athletes, using the environment you have to the best of your ability, and to try and do almost make training as play. We have this phrase in the UK is to make things as enjoyable as possible. And at the end of the day, it's about developing people. We're in the people business, so that for me is really important. And obviously, keeping athletes engaged for the long haul. It's not just about if they don't make it at 17, 18, they drop out. It's about developing athletes into senior athletes and ultimately doing sport for life. In terms of, I suppose, my own kind of coaching philosophy, I would say I'm quite based on feel, and that doesn't work for every athlete, but that's just the way I suppose I've been brought up. I use data to inform, but I'm not a slave to the data, so to speak. So it's using what I think is the right amount, and going with that, and providing good training. I think for me as well, I'm quite I suppose traditional kind of polarized approach to training. So it's quite a lot of volume, aerobic work, develop the engine, but ultimately it's about training to the demands of the event. So that depends on what athletes need, and understanding your athletes' physiology. So it's about doing the right thing, and I'm quite I wouldn't say I'm ridiculously fixed in one approach. It's been quite fluid with different athletes, but ultimately it is about training a little bit by feel, and obviously testing when we need to and when we can, but ultimately it's keep things simple and consistent. For me, it's about how can you string together as many weeks as possible without kind of breaking down, and I'm sure we'll get into that in terms of decision making and when do we need to back off, but trying to piece that all together.
Yeah, that's great. And a couple of follow-ups on that. First of all, I realized that we didn't mention in the intro, but you're also the coach of George Goodwin, who has more recently moved to long distance and has had some success already there. So you're not just on the ITU short course scene, and that's where a comment like preparing for the demands of the event becomes important, because you do both styles of racing, or coaching, I should say. And then another thing that I want to follow up on is when you say that you're field-based, when you prescribe workouts for athletes, does that mean that you generally just prescribe in terms of a verbal cue, like easy or moderate or hard, or how do you prescribe workouts?
Yeah, I think it's and it can change. Maybe that can frustrate people, but ultimately it's about verbalizing and ultimately knowing the athlete and where. So I will prescribe athletes, in terms of paces or watts or whatever, but that's based on knowing the athlete and knowing kind of the ranges they should be in, and they should know that as well. So it's about the athlete understanding themselves. So it sometimes takes time, but it's trying to keep things as simple as possible, really, and just doing the work.
Yeah. And another thing you mentioned was creating memories and using the environment. So can you elaborate a bit on that? What is it that you mean by that?
I think for me, I was lucky enough in my time in Scotland. I worked alongside the head coach at the time when I was the assistant, Chris Volley, for example, and we both had similar philosophies, and we loved the outdoors. And so for us, when we were organising camps, whether it was camps in Scotland, or even when we're on camp in Spain, for example, we would just try and do different things that the athletes would remember, and things that you have stories to tell afterwards. So it could be whether it's in Scotland and it's a camp, and it's horrendous weather, but you still get out and get the sessions done, or it's running up a mountain with each athlete has to carry a wheel, and then at the top they have to change the tube. It's just things like that it creates. It's different, but it also it's applicable to that kind of age group and skill development, and the same with if you're on camp in Spain. I remember one time we had a mini 4-day break. We used to be based a lot in Aguilas, and we'd go down. We actually did one time. We had 4 days break. We went down to Granada. We stayed at the bottom of the Sierra Nevada ski station road. And one day we said, right, we want to go up to the center, the ski resort. This was in January, and two of the kids went skiing for the day. And this is in the middle of a training camp, so it's not maybe that traditional, but it's and for us, the other 2 or 3 athletes, we hired snowshoes and went snowshoeing. So it's it creates those memories, and it's still applicable. It's still good training. And the athletes enjoy it. So that's the main thing.
Yeah, perfect. And then let's get into something that we discussed in our email conversation before that would be a good topic, and that is consistency. And it's something that we all know is important, and basically every single guest on the podcast will mention consistency at least once. But I thought it would be good to discuss a bit more how one can actually achieve consistency, and you have discussed a few ways that you do that. So what would your thoughts be around achieving consistency?
Well, I think for me, it's about athletes. It comes back to athlete decision making. So it's about athletes being able to, I suppose, make the right decisions. And this takes time. And you wouldn't expect a developing junior athlete they're going to make mistakes. And that's, I suppose, how you achieve that long-term consistency is by making mistakes and learning from them. If you don't learn from them, then you're just going to carry on making those mistakes. So we've all seen the athletes who turn up to a training session and they don't tell you they've got a sore throat, but they just crack on because they think they have to do the session. Whereas the smart decision would be to, well, no, I've woken up, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, and I either do an easy aerobic day, not the hard session that's planned. So that develops over time. So it's about athletes making smart decisions and being able to know, even if they're in a session and they just feel that, no, I just need to back off a little bit. And sometimes it's very hard to do that in a group environment because, there's egos. They want to show what they've got up against maybe their training partners. But it's getting to that stage where athletes are comfortable within each other. They know, oh no, I don't need to do that final 2 reps. And that takes time. It takes education from the coaches and dialogue between everyone. And it takes confidence to do that. Not everyone can do that.
How do you as a coach help your athletes develop that decision-making ability?
I think it's just about if and when, because it will happen, athletes will make those mistakes. It's about sitting them down or going for a walk and just chatting about it and asking them, well, what was your thought process to make that decision to come to that session when you probably know deep down that you probably shouldn't come to it. And it also comes back to the point of, well, you could infect the rest of the group, for example. So it's about being aware of the group needs as well. So, and look, and most of the athletes, they'll get it. But it just takes a bit of time and maturity as well. And as I said, just that belief and the confidence that they're making the right call. Because as you know, and we all know as coaches, athletes, they want to just keep pushing. But it's how you bring that back.
Yeah. And on that note, you mentioned there that maybe on a given day, an athlete doesn't have to do those last 2 reps, or maybe they don't have to push themselves to go just as hard as their training partner if they're having a bit of an off day. So those would fall into, I guess, intensity management. And that is something that, especially for young athletes, I think is definitely a challenge to get young athletes to do that right, but I think it also applies to age groupers. What are your thoughts around just generally managing intensity and also how that plays into consistency?
Yeah, I think coming back to the intensity thing's an interesting thing, because we also, a lot of us deem, or most of us deem, maybe successful sessions by how hard they are or how fast they are, and actually, I especially maybe with age groupers as well, who maybe are doing Ironmans or 70.3s, when it comes to the run, for most of them, they're not running that fast. So I'm not saying you have to just run slow in training, but it's actually being realistic and just training to the demands of your event and ultimately just get strong. So remembering that, I think coming back to maybe faster junior athletes and developing ITU athletes, it's about, I still see, and I was probably part of that, made the mistakes of trying to push too hard, maybe, or athletes thinking faster is better, when actually maybe you look eventually at the, I call the extension rule. You extend the period of how long they can go at a given pace, rather than just thinking, well, I can do, 5 by a K at 250, whereas actually can you actually do 5K at 3 minutes in one go? And ultimately, again, when athletes are running 10K off the bike, how many are actually running? Not many are running sub 30. So obviously the aspiration is still to run that quick, but in reality, a lot of people train maybe too fast. So it's about, that's probably another one of my philosophies is or training thoughts is about strength and back end strength, and I suppose how you pace things as well. So managing intensities. It's about trying to educate the athletes of why you're telling them to do that, and getting them to understand it and make the right calls. But also as well, I think a lot of us get into this trap of, you have to go to the well every hard session, every Tuesday track. Maybe you don't have to do that every week. It's about, maybe I've got more and more into that point of athletes finish a session knowing they can do more, and be content with that. It's not have to finish every session lying on the track face down. So again, it just comes back to education and trust in what you're trying to do in the longer term.
Yeah, no, those points really resonate with me as well. And I remember specifically somebody like Joel Filial has talked a lot about that, and how very rarely do they run, if ever, do they run faster than race pace in training, because the issue isn't being able to run your 5x1K at whatever pace they want to be running at, but being able to run 10K off the bike and having the strength to do it at the pace that is required to win the race. And that is not very fast when you break it down into 1Ks for the caliber of athletes that he's coaching, for example. So extending, as you say, rather than intensifying, is often a good way of going about it. Yeah, and also doing sessions when you're tired, and that's really important, because ultimately you're running off the bike fatigued. So it's getting used to that, and getting used to that feeling of fighting through those sensations. So I think that's a really important aspect of our sport. How much do you use, and specifically for the run, I think, and for ITU, I think this is an interesting topic to me always. The track is a very commonly used tool, because obviously it gives you a sense of complete control, and it exactly to the second how fast you're running or your reps. But the race is run on the road, and it's run, as you said, when tired, and it's a strength discipline. It's not a speed discipline, as we have discussed already. So what's your thought on using the track, and are there some other types of workouts that you use to prepare athletes for the run that is going to be a 10K off the bike, and not a fresh mile or something that some track sessions seem to be preparing athletes for? Yeah,
it's a good question. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the track. I've used it in the past a lot, probably more because athletes wanted to do that, or they felt that's what they needed to do. So almost to a point where, as a coach, you think, well, I have to follow that, or that's what other people do. But I've never been, maybe because I was never a track runner myself, or I never enjoyed running on the track myself. I didn't find that very inspirational. I get the feeling there is a good sensation of, a group of athletes running fast around the track, and it looks good, but ultimately it can be quite soul destroying. And as you said, athletes determine a good session because they're just getting 400 meter splits or 800 meter splits. I've actually, in the past, with some athletes, when we've been doing track workouts, because some athletes might be so obsessed with just looking at their watch or looking at splits, I would get them to run with no watch and just run on, again, feel. And then I might give them the splits afterwards. But you're right. Athletes don't, in a race, they race against other, competitors. It's about that competitive, tactical element, not just running around. Because lots of athletes can run quick on a track. But I've actually seen athletes, quite interestingly, on a training camp, other coaches do set up dead turns on track workouts. I've never seen that before, actually. So a bit more specific to triathlon racing. But coming back to your question, I think for me, I quite like setting up, whether it's courses on the road or on the gravel, just away. So historically, that would be kind of our Saturday session, that kind of strength-based session. But even a Tuesday session, if we weren't on the track, it'd be road reps or grass. Also with specific demands of dead turns, because that's something that's at ITU level is really, really important.
Yeah. And then coming back to the consistency topic once more, you mentioned earlier that you like to see athletes be able to just crank out week after week without overdoing it, but doing a big amount of aerobic work. And so by that, I kind of infer that maybe you're not a fan of things like 2 week on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on, 1 week off patterns. Is that correct, or Do you apply those sort of patterns as well? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and it's an interesting topic because every coach or people have got different viewpoints. For me personally, I do quite just like the fact of trying to be consistent and almost not setting for some athletes, not setting right, this block, we're going to take a rest after 3 weeks, for example. Religiously, that some people do that. I find, say you take a week, not a week off, but a week easier, it can be quite a long time. And athletes can get maybe some stale. So, ultimately it's about taking what an easy day. So there wouldn't be a rest day completely in the week. It would be an easy day. So just say it's a Friday. It would just be an easy spin, easy run, maybe an easy swim, maybe. For planning longer blocks, for some athletes, it would be like, okay, well, looking into the future, and this would be based maybe not less around races, because when we've got in race season, that almost creates your natural, you're going from this race to the next race. Whereas if you're in a bigger, maybe winter block or early season block, then it's like, okay, you ask the athlete, where do you think you need to pencil in the future, whether it's a 3-day down block of training. And for some athletes, that might be, because some athletes, you tell them to take 3 easier days and they hate it. Whereas some athletes, you've got to know what makes them tick. So, some of our athletes in Scotland, 3 days might be 3 days away in the mountains. It's away from training, but it's still, it ticks their box because it's fun. They're in the fresh air. They're not just sitting on the sofa feeling like, I'm bored. So you plan that in, and obviously you would see the athletes and you'd be able to make these changes if it needs to happen earlier, for example. So that's where it comes back down to athletes being able to make smart decisions and know how they feel, and not just not being soft. So not that athletes would be to get some downtime earlier, but it's about, okay, how can I, in the long run, to get the most out of the block, I might need to take we planned it, in 3 weeks' time, but I need to actually take these days a bit easier now, and then we crack on again. So it's been quite fluid with the plan. It's not been rigid. And that takes trust on both sides. And obviously, over time, it gets better because athletes get to know themselves more.
Yeah, perfect. And you mentioned there when you get into racing, then it sort of takes care of itself with the periodization, and that is true when we're talking about the kind of short course athletes that you're coaching. However, for many age group athletes, which you also coach, that might not be the case. Many age group athletes might have a couple of races per year. That being said, what's your thought on how important it is for an athlete's development, whether we're talking about short course, budding elite athletes or age group athletes, to just put themselves on the start line and just race and gain experience from racing and learning that way? Do you have any views on that? Yeah,
for me personally, ultimately we do sport. Well, we train to compete and hopefully get the best out of yourself. And obviously, we all know, we've all seen athletes who are racers and who are maybe better trainers across all spectrums from elite to age group. And I think, it's just not afraid to be putting yourself on a start line. So even if it's just part of your training, but it's to mix things up and to go and do your local 5K or 10K, or it could be a local 10-mile time trial. It's that it may not be your A race, but it's actually learning how to get the best out of yourself on that given day. And even if you're not tapered for it, it's still a good exercise because, on this given day, I feel like this, but ultimately I'm going to try and get the best out of myself, because it's going to be different to a training session. Because, and it's also, I see a lot of athletes, some athletes almost dread racing, which I find a little bit, it's a shame really, because ultimately, obviously athletes get different periods of nervousness, and it's about how you control that. And I suppose I have this kind of way of thinking. It's about trying to be excitedly nervous, and almost just kind of just twitching to go, looking forward to be on that start line. And I think for me, it's about trusting the work you've done. Most athletes will know it's not about just crossing your fingers and hoping on the start line. It should be about, well, I've done this work, so I trust the work that I've done. And then it's about, well, it's down to me now. It's down to about just executing the race. And that's, it's easier said than done for some, but but ultimately I'm a big believer in that. Because athletes know if you stand on the start line and you haven't done the work, or you missed 6 weeks of prep, well, obviously you're going to have to either do it just to finish, or reevaluate your objections or overall objectives of the race. So I think for me, it's just don't be afraid to put yourself on a start line, and the more you do it, it doesn't become such a big deal.
Yeah, that I agree with. That's one of the big things with racing. It becomes less of a deal the more you do it. What do you think is, other than that, the biggest sort of potential area for learning and decreasing the risk of like not performing to your ability in races? Is it more of a psychological side, like learning how to push yourself really deep time after time? That's one that I see quite a lot. That helps with racing more and more. You learn to do that better. But it could also be other things like pacing or tactics, all sorts of things. Really, what would you say are the biggest benefits, if you specify what the biggest benefits might be?
Yeah, well, I think you touch on that in terms of the psychological aspect, being able to just how deep you can dig in a race, and most people can always go a little bit harder, or just push on, and it's almost like the default sometimes you can always push a little bit harder. So that's something you learn, I think. It's not always a nice feeling, but ultimately it comes down to the individual and how much they're willing to put themselves on the line and hurt. I think other things that can affect, I suppose, the outcomes, especially in long course racing, is dialing in your nutrition strategy, and that's a big thing that I've seen over the years, that people have really been in good shape, but ultimately whether they've tried something different or they just haven't used that strategy in training. So that's important, especially the longer the races go on. I think I suppose they're key things.
Right, great. Another topic: group training or training in a daily training environment on the elite side with a squad like you have there in Bath and in previous positions in Stirling and so on. What are your thoughts around them? What are the pros and cons of training with others in that kind of environment, and what does the coach have to do to manage that environment to make sure that it becomes an overall really positive experience and you minimize the potential pitfalls?
Yeah, I think when a group environment works well, it's a great place to be in, and it almost manages itself. I think, I suppose, you as a coaches and with the athletes, you set that kind of ethos, the values that you want in the group. And the athletes live by those values, and almost police themselves if it becomes a group that's really trusting. And it can be, when it's done well, it can be really, really positive. And when it's not done so well, then you have more issues, and it can be quite fragmented. But ultimately, it comes down to communication and athletes respecting each other and wanting. They're ideally all on the similar path, similar goals. Obviously, within groups, you're going to have a natural hierarchy in terms of there's always going to be the better athlete or the best athlete in the group, or one or two, and it's about how they all work off each other and respect each other and get the most out of each other. And so, I think it can be really, really powerful. It's the other side of the group training aspect is obviously within our sport, athletes will naturally train by themselves for maybe their easy runs or easy rides. It's that, and it's understanding what each athlete needs, because not every athlete will be a social butterfly, and they can't really cope with doing everything with everyone. But I think the key sessions really benefit from that group environment, and it could well be you turn up and most likely there could be 3 or 4 different sessions, but athletes start and finish the sessions together, so it feels like a group. But they might be doing, 2 might be doing one session together, the other 2 might be doing something different, but it's still got that group feel. So I think it's managing that. I think, and then as I said, it comes back down to athletes being able to, use each other to push each other, but also know when to. No, today's I've done enough. I don't need just because my mate is doing another 2 reps doesn't mean I have to do them. But no, I think when you're in a great environment like that, it really does massively lift people, and it makes you feel like you're part of something. And I've seen it firsthand that if an athlete you've been training with all of a sudden makes a step up in training or racing, and you see that gives you a natural boost as well. Because it's like, well, I'm doing the same as him or her, and it's not always gonna transpire into you becoming suddenly making huge strides, but it should give you that natural boost in confidence, and well, we're doing the right sort of stuff. And you're also, a lot of athletes will live together as well, who train together, so it's like a big kind of family, really. So yeah, really good when it's done well.
Yeah. When it's done well, what are the potential pitfalls then if it doesn't go well, or if it's not done well?
I think when potentially, it's difficult because obviously different scenarios that could happen. Whether athletes, I think as athletes get older, they might naturally start to have different viewpoints or opinions. So maybe they start to maybe not quite agree with maybe what the coaches set, or they feel like they might start to get a bit unsettled and they maybe start looking elsewhere, and other athletes might see that, and it just suddenly becomes quite unsettling, and it can quickly unravel. So it's about, again, it comes back down to that culture, but also naturally athletes will move on as well. Obviously athletes tend to, they might stay in one place for 3, 4, 5 years, but naturally some athletes will move on. So it's that natural cycle of who then comes back in and keeps that group going. There's other things that can make groups fracture, and it's ultimately just down to relationships, isn't it? And we're human beings, and sometimes people fall out, and it can be over silly things. But ultimately, it's how I suppose as the coaches and the support staff manage that environment the best that they can. Not always easy, but I think it just comes down to, as I said, having eyes and ears on the ground and knowing kind of when things are maybe not quite right, and it's trying to deal with those things as quick as possible and not just let it fester, because then that can make it worse.
Yeah. What about for age groupers that have a very different situation and life context compared to young developing athletes and full-time elite athletes? What's your recommendations for them in terms of maybe benefiting from some of the positive effects of training with others that you mentioned? Is this something that you discuss with the age groupers that you coach and advise them on?
Yeah, I think it comes down to individual preference and what they've got available. So each athlete might be part of a training club or a triathlon club, and it's about what fits into their daily lives. So if they can, so I've got I know athletes who train mostly by themselves because that's what fits their lifestyle best. They might still be part of a club, and they've got that option potentially if it does fit, then great. Other athletes really thrive off that group environment. They really need it because that's the kind of person they are. They get the most out of training with others, and I know many like that. So it's again, it comes back down to what people want and we'll get the best out of, rather than saying, well, you must do that because that's the right way. There isn't really a right way. And I suppose I'd go back as well to the previous point of group training versus individual training in a training center. And my philosophy, or my ideas is actually, and we've had discussions with this in the past, it's like, is it more beneficial to say you've got a group session that's maybe not quite bespoke to that individual athlete, but they might get more out of it because they're pushing each other out of that session. Whereas if they just did their own very, very specific session on their own, what is better? Is it? So I give an example. Years ago, we put some of our athletes to a local running club, and we had no, say one session per week, and it was a really good local running club. And it would push our athletes because they were better runners than our athletes. But we had, as coaches, we had no real, we didn't know what the set was going to be. But my idea was, well, for a little while, it's quite good to do that, because even though the session won't be so, it's not going to be outrageously, it's not going to be so stupid that it's going to be detrimental to the athlete, but it's, I think it would have more benefit to the athlete because they're training with faster athletes, different athletes, and it'll push them on in that small window. Maybe not for the whole year. So that's my thoughts. Other coaches would say, no, the athlete needs to do the exact session that's prescribed for their benefits. And that's absolutely fine as well. So it's just, it comes down to what your thought process is and what you want out of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I've had athletes in the same situation where we've just agreed that you go to this weekly run session because we don't know exactly what the session is going to be, but we know it's going to be pretty good and you're going to be pushed by fast runners. And I think especially with age groupers, with swimming is the perfect example of where this might be really, really applicable to. For one thing, it's not only that it gets you to swim perhaps harder than you would otherwise, which in swimming I think is quite often a problem, that many people don't push themselves quite hard enough, but also it just gets athletes to swim more than they would otherwise, because athletes tend to get bored even by a 2,500 meter set, but then you go to a swim squad and it's 4,500 and it just flies by.
And also enjoy it as well.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then moving on to another topic, you mentioned Darren Smith earlier, and I wanted to ask you about generally speaking, your biggest coaching influences. Who have they been, and what have you taken from them?
Yeah, I think for me, obviously I mentioned Darren as probably my first proper triathlon coach, and he has probably been the biggest influence on my career. He was the one that said to me before I started coaching, I think you could make a decent coach. So that always stuck with me way back. And Darren, yeah, I think he came to Scotland and almost revolutionised the sport in Scotland at the time, in the early 2000 onwards. Kind of opened the eyes of the current athletes back then of what real performance was, what a performance environment looked like. I think he was dealing with at the time athletes that thought they were good. They were national champions in Scotland, but really they were just big fish in a small pond. And he opened the eyes to what a real performance environment looked like. I think he always, I remember one of the times he would question, we might go away, or not before my time, the older athletes in the system might go away to Majorca for a week in March or April, and stay in a decent hotel, and he would just look at that and just say, I don't see the point in that. What's the point in going away for 1 week and staying in a nice hotel? That's not really teaching you anything. And his idea was you go away and you do a 6 to 8 week camp, proper camp, and you live sparsely. You don't stay in fancy accommodation. And you just learn the ropes of the sport, and also just going in, if it was a camp in France for the summer, it would be very much go and do the local races, or try and earn a living as well, and just learn your craft. So he opened our eyes to that, and obviously he came from Australia, where he'd been part of the system there. He'd been coaching. He'd coached Olympians. So to us, he was pretty inspirational. And he had an attention to detail that I'd never come across. Just almost an obsession, whether it's technical in the water. He made us find. If we had an injury, he would make us read up and find out what the injury was. For example, he would instill that learning in the athlete, and rather than it just being, just go to a physio and just be told, and he would test us, and he would test the practitioners. I remember a story of, he was very good at, we didn't have a lot of resource in Scotland, but he was very good at finding ways around the system. Or if we wanted a weekly massage, he would find a local guy, but he would test. Say it was a massage therapist, he would test that person on himself first to almost test the guy. It's kind of things that it sounds, it's just off. It's kind of just off the wall a little bit. But he's still someone that I keep in touch with, and obviously he went on to do fantastic things after his time in Scotland. Not the most easy person to be around all the time, but that's many of the best people in the world are can be difficult and different. And he's still someone that has a presence in a room. If I was to meet him, and certainly I suppose it's just a respect there of what he's done, and admiration, and that continual wanting to learn and be the best that you can be. A huge inspiration on me and an influence.
If you would pick a couple of things that you have taken from him and applied to your coaching, what would it be?
He was always very good at videoing. So that was one of my very first memories of Darren, was the constant videoing. So constant feed in terms of technical. So that's something I brought in, whether it's underwater, before the age of GoPros, we had these big, massive camcorders with the big casing so we could put them under the water. I took that into my first early days of coaching, and that feedback to athletes. I suppose the simplicity of just, taking, going on camps and going staying self-catered, teach the kids how to cook and to feed, to learn for themselves, not just be given it on a plate. There's other stories of, he was always a stickler for going away on camp. If athletes took too much luggage, he would just he wouldn't be very happy. So he's very minimalistic. So he didn't like the flash kits. Athletes go and get the fancy bikes or whatever. He just wanted things simple. And there was a story. We turned up to the airport once at a camp, and one of the athletes turned up, and Darren just looked at him and said, "You're not taking that luggage. That's too much." So basically, in the airport, made him unpack and basically just, it's things that probably doesn't happen very often anymore. But it's things like that kind of, and just values of just doing the details well. There's a few things that I wouldn't take away as well, but that's obviously that's fine as well. That's me learning from my own way as well.
Yep.
But no, he was, his results speak for themselves.
Yeah. Are there any other coaching influences that you want to mention?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I mentioned Chris Volley, who was my kind of head coach at the time when I was assistant coach in Scotland. And he really, we got on really well, and we had the same, I suppose, philosophies of being outdoors. And he had a great sense of adventure. And with the group of kids we had at the time, just his ability to think up pretty cool things to do. And I would just run with it because, well, there were cool ideas and just, again, creating memories and training as play. So I think it worked really well at the time for that group, for individuals. And it's quite, people speak about it, still to this day. So Chris, and a great communicator to express, speeches or pre-talks, before sessions, how the session's going to go down. And so that was always something that I could learn from. And then there's another guy who's been instrumental in Great British Triathlon coaching, is a guy called Rick Balatti. And Rick has been predominantly throughout the last 10 years in charge of kind of the junior program in Great Britain. And he helped me a lot in the early years of helping develop the junior athletes I was working with, and give me the confidence and to challenge me and give me ideas of how to do things differently. So, and the confidence of what I was doing was okay. But he's been a big, and still is, a help to me. And also back in the early days as well, there's a very, 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 probably one of the brightest coaching minds in triathlon, probably now in running, is Chris Jones, who's, I'm not sure if you've come across him, but he was one of the early kind of national coaches in Great Britain, and been very, very smart individual. And he was almost like I remember having the first conversation with him around, don't train in the grey zone, don't go in that middle zone. It's you kill the athlete, develop the engine, develop the aerobic system, and when it's the right time, you can do that sort of threshold work. But it's because at the time he was the Irish coach and I was coaching an Irish lad, so I had that contact with him. So again, just people like that, just to bounce ideas off and to learn off of, and people you really respect. It's lucky enough to be around those sorts of individuals.
Yeah, right, perfect. And if you look back to yourself as a coach from, let's say, 10 years ago, and you could tell yourself some things, I'll give yourself some advice. What would you tell yourself from 10 years ago?
I think for me, it's a good question. I suppose just try not to worry about the things that probably don't really matter. It sounds quite obvious, but certainly myself, I would probably sweat the small stuff or overthink things, and ultimately it's about things are probably not as big an issue as you probably thought they were. So don't overthink things. I think for me as well, I think you're not going to get on with everyone. And that's okay. It's respecting each other, and ultimately finding the people that you trust and get the most out of. So I think that's important. And again, not overthinking things and overanalyzing things of, don't quite gel with that individual. Is that because it's me? Or ultimately find your team that you get the most out of. I suppose that would be the kind of, two key things to reflect back on, but also and to enjoy the journey as well, because a lot of time we get caught up in this, year after year and race to race, and you maybe not enjoy things. And an example would maybe be that for me at the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, and it was a big thing for us. It was a home games in Scotland. But you get so caught up maybe in the performance and the delivery, and actually sometimes you just need to take a step back and actually just take in the surroundings and enjoy that. So it's easier to say in hindsight, but enjoy the journey.
Yeah, those are some great points. And the first one that you mentioned there with not sweating the small things or thinking things, I'm sure that's something that you see in athletes that you coach that they might do, and now you can guide them about that. But are there any common things that you think athletes overthink perhaps, or put too much emphasis on, like they sweat the small things, so to say, that you would like to caution against?
I think athletes, I think back to examples I've worked with, hopefully this relates to the question, but it's athletes can be very hard on themselves, and so it's almost trying to, and that's natural for high performing individuals, but ultimately it's not until maybe they stop the sport and actually look back on actually what they did. It was actually quite impressive. So it's at the time they don't really give themselves that kind of praise that they might need, and so I think that's I think that's important, and it's hard to do at the time because every athlete, again, my experience from high performing athletes is they're almost never content with what they're doing. And I suppose that's a mark of a very good athlete. Maybe if you're content with what you're doing, you're not striving hard enough. So I think that's quite important, and I suppose a reflection of and not worrying about stressing about if you've missed a couple of days training. Again, I see that a lot, and it's about is what it is, and athletes they forget how quickly they get their sensations back and their fitness back, even if they've had to take a week off. I'd rather them take the extra couple of days rest and recovery than trying to get back too soon. So that's always something that's, I think, it's difficult in the moment because athletes just think all they see is that they're missing training, and they see their friends training and doing sessions. So that's when you have to have those conversations and try and just take a step back and guide as best you can for the athlete. So that's quite an interesting one that I've found.
Yeah, that's good advice. And if you could give advice to age group athletes listening to this, let's say your top 3 pieces of advice for age groupers, what would that be?
Yes, I think for me, you might relate to this as well, just because there is a session on the plan or there's a session on Training Peaks doesn't mean you have to do it. And that might seem a bit kind of, why would it be down there anyway? But I think it comes back to those athlete decision making, and sometimes I see a lot of athletes can be they just want to be told what to do, and they'll just do it to the letter of absolutely, and that's fine. But I think it's sometimes just because it's down on a bit of paper or on the computer, it doesn't mean you have to do it. So obviously things can get in the way, and if you have to miss a session, then it's not the end of the world. And don't try and put it in your recovery day. I've heard that before as well, and it's just back it off. I think for me, just from my background, don't be, I suppose maybe slave is the wrong word, but don't be so addicted to numbers and thinking that's the end. That's what makes a good session. Sometimes it's nice to switch off every so often. So even if you are with numbers based, that's absolutely fine. But maybe try every so often. Actually, I'm just going to run without a watch, or go for a bike ride and just go for a couple hours and see how it makes you feel. It's not trying to convert you to the other side of the fence, but it's just trying different things. Because at the end of the day, it's about keeping motivated, and if you can try a few different things, then great. And then obviously it comes back down to consistency, but we've mentioned that, and everyone knows it. And enjoy the journey, as we've said. So that's why we do it. We don't do it to make ourselves miserable.
No, those are excellent points. The first one that you mentioned there, with just because the session is in the program, it doesn't mean you have to do it. I think that's a really interesting one, and you could discuss that topic alone for hours, because of course you want athletes that have the ambition to get things done and are hardworking and diligent, but at the same time, decision making, as we have discussed, is really important, and nothing is rigid. Like, you need to have the flexibility and take good decisions when you need to take them. So finding that balance between just having a little bit of grit to push through, even in some tough situations, but also knowing when is the right time to not push through, and when to be flexible and adjust things, having the autonomy and feeling empowered by your coach as well to do so. That's a really important part of a coach-athlete relationship, and but even just educating the athlete in what you as a coach expect, and a tricky question and tricky to find the right balance there, but it's important to try to work towards that good decision making on part of the athletes, and as a coach, guide them towards that.
No, it's not an easy process, but it's just develops over time, and yeah, that's the key thing.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the rapid fire questions, is there anything I should have asked you that that you would have liked to have discussed that we didn't discuss?
Not really. I think for me as an individual, I like to as a release from coaching or work. I really enjoy just going out and doing adventures on my bike. That's the kind of individual I am. I go and I'm quite big into bike packing now. So lightweight gear, put all my stuff on my bike, and go and explore the countryside. So.
What's a nice bike packing tour or a trail run or mountain run or something in Scotland that people should try if they go to Scotland?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I did it last year, and it was brilliant. Well, there's a couple, but the best probably bike packing one, which you can ride the whole way. It's from Glasgow to Inverness, and it's called the Badger Divide. So it's a 350k kind of gravel ride. And last year I did it over 2 days with my good friend, and yeah, just fantastic. Great scenery. If you get the right weather, it's awesome. So I recommend that.
Sounds good. Sounds great. And then the rapid fire questions. The first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to endurance sports?
Yeah, this is a good one. To be honest, things have changed over the years, whether it's different Twitter or whatever. But I quite like, right now, I actually quite like the Twitter page or handle. It's called La Flamme Rouge, which is really good because it has great content on live bike races, but also good analysis of the bike races and goes into some different training. So yeah, La Flamme Rouge I quite enjoy. I enjoy, from a running side of things, Steve Magnus's book, his original first book. It's The Science of Running.
Science of Running, yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoy that. It's put across in a simple way. And I think you can relate and get a lot out of it as a coach.
Yeah. Then what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
Yeah, going on from my bike packing, I think for me it's my hardtail mountain bike, which acts as my gravel bike, and my recently purchased very lightweight tent, which weighs I think 700 grams. So
that's nice. That's really cool.
Yeah.
One person tent. Or 2% tent?
Yeah, very much one person.
All right. And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
I think for me, just being reliable. Over time, I think that's a very key thing for coaches, to show the athletes that that you can be relied upon to be there and be consistent. So I think that's very important and a good trait to have.
Yeah, perfect. And finally, tell the listeners where can they follow you and keep up with what you're doing, social media, websites, and so on. Yeah,
I think. Well, I'm on Instagram. I think it's just Blair.Cartmell, and mostly I just post very much it's my trips and adventures. I'm on Twitter as well at Blair Cartmell. So again, just. You can follow me on there, So. And
your coaching business, New Triathlon, is that still?
So that's still in the background, and I do the odd blogs occasionally, but it's on not as consistent as it should be.
Yeah, but it's newtriathlon.com or yeah. Okay. Well, we'll link to all of that in the show notes. So thank you so much, Blair, for taking the time to come and chat with us this afternoon. It was really great to hear your thoughts on coaching. So once again, much appreciated.
Perfect. No, appreciate coming on, and you do great content. So keep it up.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Blair. As always, you can find the show notes for the episode on scientifictriathlon.com, where we'll have links to Blair's website, New Triathlon, and to his Twitter and Instagram profiles. On Thursday, we have another TTS Thursday episode coming out, and next Monday there will be an interview, and it will probably be Björn Kafka from Aerotune, still to be confirmed, but there will be an exciting one about physiology and training and testing if that happens, or if not, it will probably be in a couple of weeks. We're just sorting out the final details for and haven't recorded that interview yet, but yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. So stay tuned, stay subscribed, and you won't miss a thing. If you're looking for coaching services or training plans, be sure to check out what we have to offer on scientifictriathlon.com. Whether you're somebody who is a very advanced, very committed athlete, or a professional athlete even, or somebody more on the beginner or intermediate side of the spectrum who just wants to get the most out of the time for you have available for training and just get a little bit fitter, we have options to help you out, and we're confident that we can help you achieve your goals, whatever they may be. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and get a free hydration plan and get 15% off your electrolyte order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. And get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.